Okay, so I will start sharing my screen in today's presentation. So today we will talk about proposal writing, and it's an introduction. So we don't, it's a quick introduction of what are the parts of the proposal, what should be in there, and then also a couple of pointers to what you should look out for before you submit, because in our experience that is very important. And yeah, afterwards we have plenty of time for questions and answers. So again, if you can think of anything, if you want to know anything also about the past webinars that we've already had, then drop your question in the Q&A box and we will have time to answer them in the end. So today is about proposal writing. As we said, it's an introduction to proposal writing. This is actually not 100% correct, sorry. This is copied from another presentation that includes other stuff. So today we'll talk about what is proposal writing, but you already know that because we've already addressed that before. And then what are the parts of the proposal, the most important ones, and what are some things that you should look out for to make sure that your proposal actually reaches the donor, because those are very important as well. And it's a couple of pointers that you should check before you submit. So first question, why is proposal writing so important? We've talked about the grant cycle a lot and all the steps that there are to it, all the things that you have to do, and that actually proposal writing is just one part of this grant cycle. But obviously it's a very important one. Like we said, if you write a perfect proposal, you send it to the wrong donor, you will not be successful. But the other way around, if you do amazing donor research and identify great donors, but you send them a very, very bad proposal, you will also not be successful. So obviously you need to write good proposals to distinguish yourself from the competition, because many people are sending proposals. The competition out there amongst NGOs is very big. We've talked about that last time as well. So to distinguish yourself, to make sure that your project is seen, etc., you have to write good proposals. It also helps to develop the project. We've talked about that last week. And it's a communication tool that you can use for all kinds of communication channels. What is the proposal? We've also talked about that last time, but maybe some people joined us who were not present in the last webinar. The project proposal is a document that should entail all the information needed for someone to decide if the project is worthwhile to implement. So it's a document where you describe in detail why you want to implement the project, how you want to implement it, where, etc. So all the important things need to be covered so that the person who's reading your proposal really, really understands what you want to do, what the purpose of your work is, why you want to do it, why you are the perfect partner to do it, etc. So they really have to understand it. And the proposal you send out to an external audience. So that's the main difference to a project plan that you would send to an internal audience, but the proposal you send out to the external audience so that someone from outside can kind of judge on your project and decide if they want to support it or maybe not. So now we already get to the parts of a normal proposal. So why does it say normal here? What do I mean by normal? Usually when there's a call for applications, then there are guidelines. We'll talk about the guidelines in a bit. And I've repeated that already a couple of times, but it's such an important point that I will keep repeating it in every webinar that I will give. When there are guidelines, then follow the guidelines. Do what they tell you to do. Really read them thoroughly to understand if you're eligible in the first place. And if you are, then you really figure out what the donor wants to see in the proposal and how to structure it. If they tell you how to do it, then do it that way. But if they don't tell you that, if you've talked to someone for a while and after a couple of conversations, they let you know, oh, you can send us a proposal, that sounds interesting, or your work sounds great, send us something, then you have to write a proposal yourself and you have to structure it yourself. So those will be the normal parts that we cover now that you should include in those cases. And usually, even if there's guidelines, even if you have to fill out a form, it will still be very similar parts, because obviously you need to know all these things that we will talk about to understand a project. If something's missing, if you don't have all the information, then you will not be able to understand what the project is about. So usually donors will ask you for the same things. Maybe they will structure it differently. Maybe they will give it different names, different words, but in general, it's going to be the same. So you start with an introduction or a project summary, where you explain or answer the W questions. Who wants to do what, where, when, and how? So when you read the introduction, you already need to have need to understand the project. You need to know what the project is about. Obviously, not in every single detail, not in all detail, but in general, everybody needs to understand what your project is about when they read the introduction or the summary. Don't write this the very first thing, even though it's the first part, but obviously sometimes when you develop a proposal, things change, you have to include new things, other things maybe are not included anymore. So in those cases, the project will change. So if you've already written the introduction or the summary, and then everything changes and you don't go back to it, then sometimes it will be wrong. So do this last, but not last minute. Take enough time to make it look nice, because that is the part that donors will read the most. Often they look at the proposal. If it sounds interesting, they read the summary, then they flip to the budget, look at beneficiaries, and then if all of that checks out, then they will move forward with it. So the summary is really important. Then you have the project rationale or the project background, which means why is the project necessary? What is the issue that you want to tackle? And why are you the perfect partner to do so? And also, why is this relevant for the donor? Those are questions that you have to answer when you write the project rationale. Or like I said, sometimes it's called justification, sometimes it's called project background, different words for the same thing. And here you can use data if you have it to explain the project. And it's a really important part, because if you cannot convince the donor that the issue that you want to solve is important, then it doesn't matter how great the rest of your proposal is. They will not give you any money if they don't understand the underlying issue. If they don't understand why the issue you want to solve or why your project is relevant for them, then why should they fund you? So that part is important. So put yourself in the donor's shoes and try to understand what their objectives are, what their goals are, and how your project can contribute to their goals. Because that way you show that your project is relevant for their work and what they want to do. Also try to base this on data, on facts, and not just make something up. Obviously you wouldn't make it up, but sometimes we read project rationales that have no proof, and then that's an issue. So here you explain basically why is the problem that you want to solve a problem, and why are you the perfect partner to solve it. And again, put yourself on the donor's shoes. Why is this relevant for the donor you're addressing? The next part, you talk about beneficiaries. So who will work with your project, who will benefit from it, who will participate in it, people you directly work with, indirectly work with, etc. There's difference between direct and indirect beneficiaries. So if you want to learn more about that, I can only, again, recommend the resource guide that we have. We will have a link in the end again. That is great because it explains the difference between all those terms. Then you have goals and objectives. We'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide with more detail. So I'll just briefly say what it is. Goals and objective means what you want to achieve with your project. What are the goals and the objectives that you want to achieve with your work? Then you have strategies and activities, and those describe how you want to achieve that. So which approach do you want to use? Which strategy do you want to use to actually achieve your goal? So do you want to implement a workshop, run an awareness campaign? Do you want to build infrastructure? Do you want to run training? What are the approaches or the strategies that you want to use? And then those strategies will have specific activities. So a training, a workshop, building something, passing out of material, etc. Those are individual activities that you also have to describe in a project proposal so that donors understand what you want to do, and yeah, what the steps are, what the singular activities are that you want to implement. Then we have project results. We also have a slide on that later, so just a little bit. It basically talks about what you think you will achieve with your project. What are the expected results of your project? What do you think you will achieve? Those are, you can describe them short-term, mid-term, long-term is a bit difficult if we're talking about impact, but basically you say what you will achieve with your project if it goes as planned. Then we have the budget, obviously. It's very important. Every proposal, every full proposal needs a budget, because you have to address how you want to fund stuff, obviously, and how much everything will cost. The donor needs to know how much money you're applying for. So the budget is really important because it's like a description of your project in numbers. So an accountant should be able to read just the budget and understand the complete project. So you will clearly see every activity that you want to implement will cost money. So every activity will be represented in the budget. So that way you can also understand the project if you just look at the budget. And that's actually what many foundations do. So really take attention and spend some time here to make sure that your budget is correct, that you don't have any calculation errors, that it makes sense, that it's not overpriced, not underpriced, and that it's logically presented. Sometimes you can include something called a budget narrative, where you add some additional information about the budget if something is not clear, or if you feel like it needs some explanation. But usually it's just tables with numbers that you should have checked out by an accountant if possible. Then you have the timeline, which describes when you want to start, when you want to end. If you have any milestones along the way, you can develop the timeline into a work plan already. That's when you add stuff like responsibilities, who will do what, who's responsible for which task. You can have a timeline that is absolute. So say we will start 1st of January 23, or it can be relative. It just says month 1, month 2, month 3. Doesn't really matter. It's just important that the donor can understand in the time frame that you will need to implement your project, and what the steps are on the way, what are the milestones that you want to achieve after, let's say, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Then you have the monitoring and evaluation plan, which is the plan where you show how you will analyze or evaluate your project in the end, to be able to tell if it was a success or not. So here you have to collect some baseline data so that you know where you start, how many kids are already going to school, how many farmers are already using improved techniques, etc. And then you need to set that's your baseline value of an indicator that you have to define. And then you have to define your target value. So where do you want to get? If you were talking about school attendance, if your indicator is school attendance, then if 50% of students attend school now and you want to get that number up to 80, then that's your target value. And you have to count in the end, when you finished your project, how high is the attendance rate now? Well, it's 85%, so yes, we were a success. So that's kind of a very simple example of how to design a monitoring and evaluation plan. And in the end, you have the sustainability plan, which is the part of the proposal where you explain how you want to run the project long term. So how do you want to finance the project long term? Are you rooted in the community well enough for the project to exist in the long term? Is your organization stable enough to support your work long term, etc.? This is a very important part for donors, because when donors identify and decide to fund a project, they are looking for a long-term partnership. They're not just looking for a project to spend some money in and then nothing will happen with it, or the money will disappear, the project will end. No, obviously they want a long-term partnership, and they want to know that their money will have some kind of impact. So in this part, you can really show that that you have ideas, that you have a plan for the future, that you're thinking long term, and that you already have developed ideas on how to sustain your project, and that you're rooted well in the community. If you want to learn more about the sustainability plan, that's actually going to be the webinar, the last webinar of the masterclass of the paid version of the premium plan, but you can also purchase access to just that webinar at a bit cheaper price than the full package. So if you're interested in that, we will include a link in the follow-up email, and you can also sign up for that webinar. It's going to be in 2 weeks, I believe, on Tuesday, so at the end of November. And that's going to be a great webinar to learn more about the sustainability plan, which again is extremely important in the proposal and really can make the difference, because many NGOs don't spend much time on the sustainability plan yet, but it can make all of the difference. So it makes a lot of sense to learn about the sustainability plan. Then again, I've already said that, I'm just going to repeat it again once more, the guidelines. If the donor gives you guidelines, then just follow those. It doesn't matter if you already have your proposal done. Adjust, adapt, and change it. And also try to mirror the language they use. Like I said, so for example, the easiest example is the project background. We call it project background. Some donors call it justification. Some donors call it reasoning. Some call it just the why, or it might be different names. So if the donors use different names, then you should also use those words, because if you mirror the words the donors use, and that goes for everything, also if they use words like country of the South instead of developing country, or project participants instead of project beneficiaries, then use those words, because it makes it much easier for the donor to see how your project aligns with theirs. And that's what you want to show. You want to show your relevance for their work. And it's a psychological thing. If you use the same words, they will feel like you align very well with them, even and it's easier to see that because you're already using the same words and the same vocabulary that they use. So it always makes sense to check the website and see which kind of words they use, and then use exactly those words. And definitely when they tell you how to structure your proposal, then just use the same headings as they use, again, to make it easier for them to see themselves in your work and see how you align with what they do. So now I just want to, just so that you get a little bit of an insight, I want to go into two parts more in detail, just to show you the different layers that exist. And again, sometimes donors use different words. For example, here we use goals and objectives. I've seen that donors sometimes say overall goals and specific goals instead of goals and objectives, but they all mean the same thing. And I think if you understand the structure behind this and the system behind this, then it will be much easier for you to also see that structure in whichever form a donor gives you, or whichever format they tell you to use. So when we talk about goals and objectives, which were the things that you want to achieve with your project. So the question, what do you actually want to achieve? Not how, but what. There's basically 4 different levels of detail that we can talk about. There's the vision, which is the broadest thing that doesn't have a lot of detail, and it's usually not found in the proposal, but found in marketing material, in your theory of change, on the website, etc. Vision is very broad, something like to end all hunger, or to end child labor in the world, or in Nepal, in a country. So something very broad. The mission is already a little bit more specific. The vision usually is something that probably cannot be achieved. It's visionary, nothing that you can achieve within a couple of projects, a couple of years. But still, it's great to aspire to it, to try. The mission is something that you could maybe achieve if you've worked for 10, 20 years in this field. So it's a bit more specific. Sometimes it's a more regional, or a little bit more specific, which kind of work is going to be stopped, which kind of education you want to support, etc. Then we have goals and objectives, and those are more specific, and they are on the project layer, kind of. So a project, usually an organization has a vision and a mission. A project has goals and objectives. So that's the different layers you have in there. Goals are a little bit broader. So what do you want to achieve with your project or your program? Sometimes it's even on the program level. And objectives, again, are more specific. What specifically do you want to achieve? They should be measurable, very specific, countable, time-bound, etc. So stuff you can count. So how many people you want to train, how many schools you want to build, how many roads you want to build, how many workshops you want to run, etc. Those are the specific objectives that you want to implement, and they all fall under your goals. The goal might be to make it easier for kids to go to school in your district, so to enhance access to education, or to support farmers in income generation. And then objectives would be more specific, so one layer down, kind of more in the details. Objectives will also help you to define your activities, because objectives will result in activities, and objectives will help you to define your indicators when you talk about monitoring and evaluation, because those are the specific things that you want to achieve, and they will translate into activities that belong to them, and will also translate into indicators that you can use to later show your success on those objectives. Then we have results. That's the second thing I want to talk about, also to kind of show you that progression of words that donors often use and what they mean in those contexts. So you have different kinds of projected results, and they are called output, outcome, and impact. And again, sometimes donors confuse those themselves. I've seen the word outcome and impact confused many times, but here I'm just giving you the correct dictionary definition. But if you see them mixed up, then obviously just tell the donor what they want to know, but understand the differences between the layers of information they need, because the output is the most direct result of an activity. It's the direct thing that happens after the activity. So if your activity is, I want to train 10 farmers, then the output is 10 farmers trained. If your activity is building a road, then the output is the road is built. The road is there now. So it's the direct result of your activity. The outcome is then a little bit more further down the line. So it's midterm. The road is used. The training, the contents of the training are applied, stuff like that. So it's the midterm. Impact would be what happens afterwards. There's the road, you build a road, and the people use the road, and then ideally the impact at some point would be the economic situation is better because there's market access through that road. Or when we talk about education, I don't know, families have higher income because kids get better jobs, etc. But that, as you see, is long term, and it's extremely difficult to measure, because the longer in the future you go and the longer time span you look at, the more other influences are there, and it's very, very difficult to claim that only your activity had influence. So if you don't have to, if you're not asked for, then don't claim impact, because technically, usually it's not correct, because it's so difficult to measure that. But usually in a proposal, you would talk about output and outcome. So what's the direct output? Usually you can count it, or you can see those things. They are easily measurable. And then what happened in the next step? What is the outcome of this? And again, sometimes those words are confused in the applications, but just to understand those different, that frequency of words, and the frequency of detail, and the time boundness of those will already help you to understand what the donor wants from you. And again, if you want to learn more, if you need more information about this, I recommend our resource guide. We will link it again in the end, and we have the great offer again that we had last time for $2.99 only. So you can just get that in the webinar. So if you want to get the book at $2.99, you'll see in tomorrow's newsletter, it's already $9.99 again, because this price we can only offer in the webinar. So yeah, my team just posted the link in the chat. I see if you want to get that book, the full book about proposal writing with all those definitions, templates, samples, etc. at $2.99 only, then you have to click the link now. It's in the chat box at the moment. Okay. So then just a couple of tips of what to think of before you submit your proposal, because I know that is when most mistakes happen. I've seen that plenty of times. Is first tip, which is obvious, but again, not many people do it, is to proofread your proposal again and again. Try to make sure that there are as little mistakes as possible. This is something that if you have volunteers, like foreign volunteers working with you, or if you have any budget, makes a lot of sense to outsource as well. Because if you or your colleague who has been working with you on the proposal for a long time proofread it, then you will miss mistakes. And also you will miss maybe logical mistakes that you might have. Maybe you didn't explain everything completely well. Maybe there's just some jumps in your logic in there, or maybe the red thread isn't there, but it's going to be very, very difficult for you to notice that, to see that, if you've written the whole thing yourself and if you've worked on this for 2 weeks. So try to have an outsider proofread it. And if you have the budget for it, that should be someone who does this professionally, because if you have 1 or 2 typos, it doesn't matter. But if your proposal is full of typos, donors might think that this is also an indication on how you would implement projects. So if you're not detail focused, if you're not very careful with the stuff that you submit, they might be scared, or they might get the impression that maybe you would also not be so careful in your project work. So that's not a good indication. So you really want to make a great impression on first sight. And again, don't give it to your friends. I mean, if there's no one else, obviously they can help you. But I always tell this story, and I will never forget that, because when I did my master's thesis, we had a group of 10 people working together. We all did our thesis, and we thought, well, great, we will just proofread each other's work, and we'll be great. There will be no mistakes left, because 10 people will read every single thesis. And one of my friends, she wanted to be very smart, and she said, we have to read everything, all the footnotes, everything. And we all said, yeah, of course. And in the end, she told us in one of the footnotes, she had hidden the sentence, whoever finds this gets a case of beer, and no one found it. None of us, because nobody read the footnotes, because who wants to read footnotes? But we had promised her that we would. But then when you actually do it, you still don't do it. That's very human, I would say. So if you can outsource this to someone who does this professionally, it's always the better way. Otherwise, just try to make sure that there's as few typos as possible, specifically in the important parts on the front page, which we've also seen plenty of times, or in the summary, because that's the first thing that they will read. Then the second one is check the math in your budget. First of all, just try to make sure that the budget is really correct and reflects your proposal, because that also sometimes happens, that the proposal changes a bit and then the budget is not adjusted, and then you don't have all the activities that you have in the proposal in the budget, or you took out an activity and it's still in the budget. So just make sure that it's correct, that it reflects everything correctly. And then in Excel is a great tool to design a budget, but at the same time, it can also happen very quickly that by accident you copy a formula instead of just a number, or vice versa, you copy just the number instead of a formula, and you can have mistakes in there. So just make sure that someone checks this, who knows how to do this and who knows Excel, who's maybe an accountant, to have a professional opinion on this. I will be honest, I've submitted a couple of budgets that were not correct, because it's very, very difficult if you've written this yourself to find mistakes in it, because your brain kind of auto fills the blanks. And I was lucky both times because I actually applied for more money than we needed. But it can also obviously go the other way around. If you make a mistake and you don't apply for enough money, and then you can't go back to the donor and say, well, here, look, I made a mistake. Can you please give us more money because I forgot to include 10,000 €10,000, so please send me more money. It's not going to happen that way. The budget is what you will get. So just make sure that the number that you end up with is the correct number, that it makes sense. And also think of ask someone if they can understand all the numbers, all the logic behind it. And here I have another example of something that happened to me. I applied for a project in South America, in Ecuador, in the Amazon region, and you can only transport goods on the river there. So the village was down the river from, so we were applying for a reforestation project, so we needed fertilizer and seeds. And the seeds we would get upriver and the fertilizer downriver. So the transportation cost for the seeds was very low, like $100, but for the fertilizer, which had to be transported upriver, the cost was much higher because we had to pay so much for petrol for the boat. But I didn't include that. I just said transportation for this, 100, transportation for that, 400. And it was the same kilometers. So I was lucky the donor came back to me and he said, well, is that a mistake or what's happening there? We don't understand. And then I was able to explain it. So in those cases, if there's any numbers that don't make sense, if very high prices, very low prices, something, transportation cost that is extremely high, then always include a budget narrative that explains a bit more about why you came up with those numbers, where they came from, and what your justification for that number is. Again, just make sure that it's correct. It's one of the things that you also frequently read in guidelines, that the donors say, please make sure the math in your budget is correct, because that happens again and again, that there's big mistakes in there, and that's not a good look. Take a look at the guidelines again. I know I keep saying that, but it is so important. Sometimes they tell you something about the format. Sometimes they tell you how to submit, how they want the front page to look like, etc. And you should always include all that information. When I work on a grant, I print out the guidelines and put it next to my keyboard so that I can keep looking at it, keep referring to it, and I don't forget anything. I don't miss any clues. I don't miss any information in there. So even before you submit, go back to it, take a look at the guidelines, make sure that you've included everything, and that you follow every single step in there. Then try to never submit right on deadline. I know that when there's a lot of work and things get busy, people tend to submit to the end, but a lot of submissions are online right now, and it's often through a portal. That portal might be jammed, or I know that many of you are also from countries where internet connection is not so reliable. I used to work in Nepal, and internet would just stop working for a couple of hours every day. In the community that I lived in, it was a smaller village, and then you can't submit, and it's very difficult. Some donors will understand, but most will just say, no, the cutoff was at 12, you didn't submit until 12, so your problem. And then again, sometimes the servers are jammed. If 100 people try to upload a big presentation or a big proposal at the same time, some servers might crash. So try to avoid that. Also, sometimes you realize while you upload that you're missing something. And if you submit 10 minutes before the deadline, then you can't add anything. If you still have a week to go, you can figure stuff out. So try to award yourself some buffer so that you don't get stressed when you actually upload, and that you can also mitigate if there's any issues with the server, with the connection, etc. Keep the formatting in mind as well, because even before the donors, even before they read anything, any word, they see your proposal. So they look at it. So it needs to look nice. It needs to look professional. When more than one person work on a document, often we see different fonts used, different sizes used, etc. But that's very destructive. Because if the first part is in Times New Roman, and then you have Arial, and then you have Calibri, and everything looks different, that's not a professional look, and that's what you want to have. You want to look professional. Also think about how to make it look clean cut. Don't use Comic Sans, or like don't use too many clip art, stuff like that. Just keep it clean and professional and nice looking. And also think a little bit about like cultural differences. Don't add anything that you think is specific to your culture, because it might mean something different in another culture. I always remember this. Once we ran a competition for proposals worldwide, and so NGOs could send us their proposals, and one was the winner in the end. So I had to read many proposals, and I noticed many proposals from East Africa, and I don't know where that came from, if someone had told them that's a good idea or where that came from, but many of those proposals had actually like a black lining on the cover page. It was a black line around the edges. And in Germany, where I'm from, that means somebody died, because it's when you get a card in the mail that where the envelope has the black lining at the side, that means somebody died. So that's like bad news. So for me, it was so weird to see all those proposals with the sign that for me clearly showed somebody died. So I was obviously I was able to stand to step away from that. But the very first thing that it created was like a negative emotion, because usually when we find those envelopes nowadays with the phone, etc., you know it before, but still 20-30 years ago, if you had an envelope like that in your letterbox, that was very bad news, because someone had died. So you don't want to instill that in anybody. So try to stay away from things that you feel like are very specific, maybe to your culture. Try to make it look as international and clear cut as possible, because you don't know who will read your proposal and who will kind of judge your proposal on what they see. Then you also need to think of all necessary documents. So if you need registration documents, is it the actual version? Do you have the stamps you need, the signatures you need, etc.? Again, if you realize that you're missing something there, it's also good if you don't submit right on deadline, but a little bit later, a little bit earlier, so that you still have time to fix stuff. And also store those documents in a location where everybody has access, so that you can actually use them to send whenever necessary. Yeah, and with that, I'm coming to the end. I just want to again show you the book that I was talking about, the NGO Guide to Proposal Writing. The book has more than 300 pages, and you see it has a lot of contents also about the concept note, letter of inquiry, the log frame, etc., everything that you need to know and understand. And it also has a template that you can use, that you can fill out, and a checklist that helps you to figure out eligibility. And again, because you are here today, you're taking part in this webinar, we offer it currently for $2.99. But the link is in the chat box. So if you want to get it now. The link will be valid for today. But again, tomorrow you will see in the newsletter that we send out that the price is already up to $9.99. Because again, usually we sell for 25, and even 25 is already a very, very low price. So during this month, we want to offer it in $10 or $9.99. But just for the people who actually attend the webinars, who are here, have questions, etc., are engaged, we are offering this at $2.99. So if you were thinking about getting the resource guide, then get it now. This is the best offer you will ever get. $3 is nothing, and it's really worth it. We have a lot of great content in here. That is extremely helpful. And again, it has many samples, many templates, where you can also get some inspiration how others did it. And we have all the other courses that you probably know about on philanthropia.org that you can check out. And with the code PFN users, you can get 30% discount on any course on philanthropia.org that we offer. We have specific ones like funding from USAID, Gulf donors, etc., but also generic ones like yeah, also proposal writing, but has some more information, or how to develop the strategy, donor research, etc. All of those. So please check it out, see if you find anything, and use PFN users for a 30% discount. Okay, so now we still have time for questions, and I see there is a couple of questions there. Yeah, and my team just posted the link again to the book. So again, if you want it, if you don't have it yet, please jump on this opportunity. So now I have 15 minutes left for questions, and I will go through the questions posted in the Q&A section. So let's start here. What's the difference between a project concept note and a project proposal? There's two different kinds of concept notes. So sometimes donors have this two-phase application process where first they ask for concept notes, and then they shortlist projects, and then you can send a full proposal. And the reasoning behind that is that they don't want to invest all the time to read all the proposals, and they don't want you to take the time to write all those proposals and then maybe not get chosen, because writing a full proposal is a lot of work. So in those cases, often they will tell you exactly what to put in a concept note. Often it's a bit more, it's shorter. It has like 4 or 5 pages max, and it should cover, in those cases, it covers almost everything, but in less detail, so not that detailed. Often it doesn't have a full budget, just a number, stuff like that. But even in there, it's important because you have limited space, so you should focus on important things. And important things would be, for example, the relevance. How relevant is your project to what the donor wants to do? Because they want to see how you would fit in with their program, how you would help them to achieve their mission, their vision, and their specific goals. So you should focus on that part. But then there's also, when we talk about concept note, it can be a tool to reach out as well. And in those cases, the concept note is even shorter, and it often focuses more on the justification than on the actual activities. And then it should also include a call to action. So it can be a good tool to reach out when you do your donor networking. And in those cases, it usually doesn't even include a budget, maybe just a number, like a ballpark number. No timeline, all of that information is not in there. It's just basically to spark interest, to reach out to a donor and find out if they would be interested in funding your project. We do have, again, in that book that I was talking about, we have info about that, about the distinction. We have a full resource guide only on the concept note, so you can check that out as well, and a couple of free resources as well on proposals for NGOs.com or on our YouTube channel. The second question is, can the mission be defined as the path to achieve the vision, or not really? So the mission is also explaining or describing what you want to achieve. The how is a different category. How is when you talk about strategies, about activities, about what you actually want to do. So that's a different part of the proposal. Obviously, you can think about how you want to achieve your vision, but often then you will just define strategies. So we want to achieve our vision of eradicating hunger by running workshops with parents to understand nutrition or something like that. So that will be a strategy. What you want to do, outreach workshops, etc., outreach, talking to people. Or you could say we want to eradicate hunger through introduction of new foods or something like that. So those would be strategies. That's kind of a different thing. Mission is a little bit more specific. So if your vision is no child is hungry anymore, then your mission could be a bit more specific, like in a specific country or a specific district, something regionally more specific, or yeah, just a little bit more boiled down. And there's a question if we can share links where donors advertise where they want to provide support. Yeah, maybe you can check out our resources about donor research. There you can find a lot about how you can go about that, how you can find donors. We do have the donor database. It's called donordatabase.org, where you can search for donors. You can try it out 1 week for free. After that, it's a paid service. And that gives you a list of potential donors that you can then further research. Since the budget is an estimation, some budget lines may be overestimated, whereas other budget lines may be underestimated. Then a budget amendment might be requested from the donor. Does that sound okay? Yeah, I mean, if prices change, if things change, for example, right now, with the inflation and changing prices, everybody will understand that things change. But obviously, if you've went out, got a quote, and then you want to buy the product or buy the service and the quote is different, that's one thing. But if you made a calculation mistake in your budget, then it's very difficult to go back and say, oh, can we adjust this? So yeah, the budget, sometimes some donors don't have more money. They allocate all their money and then you can't go up. Then maybe you can still explain and say, well, this is much more expensive than when we asked for it first time. So maybe we can't deliver everything that we promised, or maybe we have to adjust the project. You can also ask, obviously, to extend the budget, but that's not always possible. So just try to be as realistic as possible. Obviously, that's very difficult sometimes, but don't just ballpark it. Really try to find out how much are these services, etc. Collect quotes so that you know what you're talking about. And then you have a good justification as well to say, well, we have 3 quotes and they all indicated that this would be the number, but now 6 months later, the cost is 30% higher. Then obviously you can go back to the donor and explain that. There's a question, the certificate of compliance and the environment self-assessment form. That's very specific. I've never had to fill those out. I think it's specific to some donors, but obviously donors have rules, and often you have to sign that you will comply by their rules, child protection, environmental protection, stuff like that. So maybe it concerns that. And also, obviously, in many projects, you have to let the donor know that whatever you do is environmentally conscious, so that you're not polluting, that you're not buying plastic toys for children and not thinking about the environment, etc. So I think this means, at least the environment assessment means that you explain how your project would influence the environment and how you plan to mitigate that. So we see one question from someone from Liberia, and it's difficult to pay the $2.99. I know that the service we work with is connected to PayPal and credit cards, etc. If all of that is not possible for you, maybe get in touch with us and we can see if we can figure something out. And there's a question about certificates. Not 100% sure if I understand. I think for this class, because it's a free class, we don't give out certificates for participation, but for all of our paid courses, we do give certificates. So if you need that, I don't know if donors ask you for certificates that show that you kind of educate yourself. So for all of that, the paid courses that we have, all our certificate courses where you get a certificate. We will share the recording of this webinar. We will share the link either today or tomorrow with you so that you can rewatch it or share it with your colleagues. Okay, I'm sorry. I already tried to speak slow, but yeah, I tend to do that. Maybe when you rewatch it, maybe you can wind me down and let me speak slower. I'll try my best next time to be even slower. I know it sounds weird, but this is already me being slow. And there's a question, how much should we talk about our own organization in a proposal? That's a good question. And the answer is actually not too much, if possible. So often organizations make that mistake that they give a very prominent role to their own organization or the organizational profile. And often when you write a project proposal, that's not what donors want to see. They don't want to learn about your organization. They want to learn about your project. If they have further questions about your organization, they can do their due diligence and they can contact you and find out more. But usually you shouldn't take up that space in your proposal, concept note, etc., with too much information about your organization. You want to show why your organization is a good fit for that project. So if there's anything, if you have already experience with that kind of project or anything specific, if your project or your organization is completely women-led and you work in women's empowerment or stuff like that, you can mention that, but don't focus too much on it. You can include an organizational profile there, but then usually try to include it in the annex, because then they can decide if they want to read it, and it doesn't take up any space on the pages that you have, because often you have a page limit that you can send, and you don't want to spend any of that space on something that might not really help your idea and might not really help your proposal. So yeah, annex, and try to focus on the project. And where relevant for the project, you can talk about your own organization, but only under that lens. Yeah, the difference between a proposal and a concept note I already talked about. The letter of interest is often even shorter, where you quickly on 1 or 2 pages explain what you want from the donor. Often with that letter, you don't have to give like a full rundown of your project. Often it's just to request a meeting, to request a talk, a Zoom meeting, a visit, etc., to then go to the next step. So the letter of interest is really just to pique their interest, to get them to care, to get them to maybe visit you, and to connect with you. So it's like the cover letter a little bit, to start a conversation and to start a relationship. Then there's a question about funds for NGOs that I can't really answer because we are not connected to them. The difference between output and outcome. Can we say that output is measurable, whereas outcome is not? No, outcome can also be measurable, but basically it's the time. So the output is the direct result of your activity. If your activity is to hand out tools, then the output of that is tools handed out. Very simple. So if you give 10 hammers to people, then the output is 10 hammers with the people. Then the people take the hammer and use the hammer, and that's the outcome. What they do with what you give them, what they do with the output. If you train them, they use the knowledge. If you give them something, they use that. If you build something, the output is it's there, and the outcome is it's used. Then impact, the next stage is then what happens long-term in the community, what happens after that. But again, that is extremely difficult to measure. So I would stay away from that. You can sometimes also measure outcome. You can still say 10, like we trained 10 farmers, that's the output. Then 5 farmers used the knowledge. You can still count those 5 farmers. So it's not that straightforward, but it's the midterm sequence. So you can refer to the time frame to define the difference, basically. What are the major characteristics of a good proposal? Wow, that's a broad question. I think everybody would probably tell you different things. So I personally think it's extremely important that donors understand how that proposal is relevant for them. How does it align with the donors' interests? Because donors have their goals, their vision, their mission as well. They want to achieve that, and they are looking for partners in you. You can be their partners to implement what they want to do. So you have to show them how you align. And if you are able to do that very well, your chances are very high, I think, because then if they feel like your project is going to be a big help for them to achieve their own mission, even if you have like minor mistakes or minor unclarities in other parts, maybe they can come back to you. But if you cannot convince them at all that your project is relevant for them, then it doesn't matter how well the budget is crafted and how amazing the sustainability plan is, they will not be interested because it's not relevant for them. So focusing on that part, I think, is something very, very important. To make a proposal great, you can also use, like, if you make it a bit interesting. So what you always want to try to do is to make the reader feel something. If it's a technical document, but if it's just super dry and no emotion, nothing, then it's very difficult to convince someone. But once people feel something, feel a positive emotion, feel something good, then it's much easier to convince them to support your project. I think those are the most important things that make really great proposals, in my opinion. But if you ask someone else, maybe they will tell you something different. But I would tell you to focus on those parts. And then the last question I can take today is the project, if the project is a pilot for like 6 months, can I measure the impact of that project? If you have all the data, but you probably don't, because like I said, impact, if you really go with the scientific definition of the word impact, you would have to look at all indicators that influence that, that thing that you're looking at. So for example, let's say education. You build a school, and 5 years later, the school attendance rate is 90% instead of 50%. So you would think, well, it's because of the school we built, so that's our impact. Education rates are higher. But maybe at the same time, there was a new law that children have to go to school and parents will be punished if they don't send their kids to school. So then what was the real reason? Did they all go just because the school was there? Or did they maybe all go because there was a new law? Or maybe at the same time, even the road was done over. So now the road is even better and the kids can get to school because there's a school bus. So then what was the reason? That's what I mean with, it's so many. So we call the difference between causation and I just know it in German, but something can happen at the same time. And the first thing is not the reason behind it. It didn't cause it 100%. So that's why we say impact is so difficult to measure, because you would need to look at all indicators that influence education, everything. The law, the infrastructure, the general attitudes, etc. And that's almost impossible to measure. So that's why we say impact is difficult. Keep with outcome, because that's midterm, and that is something that you probably can very clearly claim. Okay, so I think I went through all those questions, and it's 12 here, probably later where you are. Thank you so much for being part of this again. Next week, we've had to switch the Thursday webinar to Tuesday. So look out for the emails that we will send you so that you know check your email so that you know when to sign up and when to join us. Next week is going to be more about proposal mistakes. So I've seen this question before as well. So I'll focus more on big mistakes that we see in proposals, because often we can learn much more from those mistakes than we can learn from if I just tell you what to do. because they are very obvious in some cases. Thanks again. If you have any questions, I saw in the chat a couple of people said, oh, we bought the book but couldn't download, stuff like that. Please send us an email and we will help you to figure it out. So if there's any issues with signups, anything, just send an email and we will help you with this. Thank you again. I hope to see you next week. And yeah, have a good day, a good weekend, and all the best. Thanks again.